heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 299, covering the week of February 28th through March 4th, 2022. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page where you can find all kinds of great stuff. The YouTube page is awesome. We have the podcast, of course. We also have a lot of our lectures from previous conferences, all kinds of cool stuff. Also, go to abbevilleacademy.org, abbevilleacademy.org. It is our online learning site. And if you've missed any of our Zoom webinars, you can get them there. They're a little bit more because of administrative costs, but we've got 13 of those there for purchase. They're 1 hour long, and they're $15 each. So it's not, and you get it forever, right? You can download it, and you get that particular Zoom webinar forever, and you can listen to it as many times as you want. It's a great thing. So abbevilleinstitute.org, if you go to abbevilleinstitute.org, give us that email address. We'll give you a free ebook exploring the Southern tradition, which is your gift just for giving us that email address. And that's how we keep in touch with you. We let you know what we're doing at the Institute, when our webinars are coming up, any programs, any events. Of course, our Daily Dose of Dixie, which is the articles we publish Monday through Friday. All that stuff comes through the email, so don't unsubscribe. I know it seems like a lot, but this is how we keep in touch with you. So if you want to stay in touch with us, give us that email address. It's vital. You can support the Institute by clicking on that Donate tab or Donate button at abbevilleinstitute.org. We exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like anything we do, the podcast, the webinars, the website, the conferences, all of that stuff, the Abbeville Press, your donations go to all those things. So that's how we keep these things going. Also at abbevilleinstitute.org, you can download our free mobile app. You can get it through Google Play. You can get it through your Apple Store. Just look for Abbeville Institute. Again, free of charge. That is something that your donations help support. And you can get your Abbeville apparel, right? Click on the shop tab at abbevilleinstitute.org and get our logo and all kinds of cool stuff. It's high quality embroidered material. So you're going to want all those things. But as always, the best thing to do, of course, with the Institute is rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Then share our articles on social media. We're not on Facebook. We're on Gab. You want to head over to Gab because it's a community of more like-minded people. But if you're on Facebook, we're not on Facebook anymore. Head over to Facebook, though. You can share our articles there. That's perfectly fine. And let people know you like it. Let people know you like the content. Let people know you like what we're doing. It is fun to do that. So, let's talk about some things. First of all, March 15th, we have a webinar coming up on Warren Harding and Grover Cleveland, their Southern strategy, and it's with author Ryan Walters, who is an Abbeville scholar. So we're excited about that, March 15th. If you're on the email list, you've already gotten the announcement for it. We'll also have another one, March 31st, with Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center, and we've already getting ready to schedule out to April. We have a great discussion about Thomas Jefferson in April. So we've got them every 2 weeks for about the next month and a half. And then we're going to try to do that and see if we can have more of these things because people really enjoy them. And it's a fun way for us to have a scholar on, somebody to talk about a topic other than, of course, yours truly, and do it that way. So a lot of good stuff. Also, the Douglas Rogers Essay Contest. If you're an undergraduate and you're listening to this podcast, or you have an undergraduate college student in your life, there is an essay contest. The deadline is March 15th. You need to get that essay in. We're coming up on it here. We're at March 6th as I'm recording this today. So less than 2 weeks, and that essay contest closes. So you want to get the essay in. All that information is on the Abbeville Institute website, abbevilleinstitute.org. First place winners get a couple $1,000. So you're going to want to go out and do that. It's a great opportunity to get some money for college. So just submit the essay. It's painless, really, if you think about it. You just have to write an essay, but no big deal. But you have to be an undergraduate. You cannot be a graduate student. You got to be an undergraduate. All right, well, let's talk about the material for the week at the Institute. We have a lot of good stuff this week, and we started off the week with a fun piece. Now, this is by Brandon Meeks, and he's going to be a writer for us on a regular basis. So look for more stories, because he's going to be writing stories for us. So storytelling is a key to the Southern tradition in so many ways. Even if you go back and look at Lincoln, right? Go back and look at Abraham Lincoln and why he became popular, at least the myth of Lincoln, why he's popular in Illinois. Well, it's because he told stories. He was a great storyteller. He supposedly got this from his dad, of course, being there from, if it was his real dad, being there from up Kentucky and this southern tradition of storytelling. It's something we miss. But there's a reason why people like Louis Grizzard. There's a reason why people like Will Rogers. There's a reason why these people are popular. Humor, Southern humor is nothing more than stories. Finding the funny in everyday things. This is what makes the Southern tradition so interesting to people. It's telling these stories. And the piece on Monday by Brandon Meeks is really good. The Hog Killing. Now, Brandon Meeks is a minister, and he has a PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. So he's a really interesting writer. And I read this and said, we got to have this guy write for us. Now, this was sent to us by another person that writes for us and said, you got to get this guy writing too. So I agreed. And so he's going to be writing for us on a regular basis. But The Hog Killing is the title of the story. And I want to read it because it's funny. It's funny. This is a funny story. And it's important that we understand the storytelling tradition in the South. In fact, at some point, we're going to have some type of webinar or conference on this where we'll talk about storytelling, and people who tell stories are vital to the tradition. And do it, if they can do it in a funny way, it's even better. But storytelling is key. So he says, a dozen years ago or so, I was pastoring a small country church, in the smallest county in the state of Mississippi. After church, one of the deacons said, we got a big dinner set on. You want to come eat? Going to be good. Sure, says I. His name was Gabe. He was chairman of the deacon board, paterfamilias to over half of the congregation, and pretty much the church straw boss. But he was a kindly, white-haired gentleman who was unpretentious as a dirt clod. He held power mostly because he didn't want any of it, but he also had a mischievous streak as wide as the Big Muddy. Ride with me, he said. He was grinning through a sparse set of tobacco-stained teeth that I swear was the mirror image of the jagged row of headstones half covered with moss in the cemetery out back. When I climbed in his pickup truck, he said, we need to make a stop before we head to house to eat. Won't take long. You want to go with a rifle? Well, I can shoot one if that's what you mean, but why do you ask? We got to go kill half a dozen hogs or so before the weather turns. I was sitting there in a three-piece suit and freshly polished Oxfords. Kill hogs, I said, eyes wide as saucers. Yeah, it's going to storm later, and I told Mildred we'd bring one home after church. She wants it as a gift. So there I was, traipsing through the woods with a rifle slung over the shoulder of my Brooks Brothers suit and coating my good shoes in mud and mashed persimmons. Directly we came to a trap that was basically a big cage. It held 5 or 6 mad hogs. Shoot 'em in the neck if you can, preacher. Don't want to ruin the heads. Mildred will make sauce out of that. I'll open the latch and bleed 'em once you fell 'em all. Just a few minutes later, I'd been waxing eloquent on Isaiah, and now I was standing in a thicket getting ready to dispatch half a herd of swine. As I fired 6 shots, Gabe opened the gate, crawled in the cage, and began slitting throats. You got 'em all in the neck, more or less, he said, grinning that graveyard grin. Now, said he, grab the hind end of that sow yonder and let's go. She looks fairly light. Do what? I said with no small amount of surprise, but then again, surprise had become my default position by now. We got to tote it out, preacher. She can't walk. You done shot her, Gabe chuckled. Gabe, I'm in a good suit. I'm already carrying a rifle. I can't haul a hog out, too. Nothing is impossible with the Lord, he said confidently. If you need to stop and rest a few times, just tell me. I'll go slow. Coming from a 70-year-old man, that was meant to spur me on to feats of strength, and by George, it worked. We managed to get the sow out of the woods and into the back of the pickup in less than half an hour, but I was a walking pigsty, and the slaughterhouse rolled into one. I was covered in blood and mud and sweat, and I felt like I had half of Greene County in my shoes. What about the others, I asked. They ain't going nowhere, Gabe answered. I'll send little Gabe and the boys after him later. We rolled into Gabe's driveway in less than 5 minutes. I'm going to go clean up a bit. We got company coming, Gabe said, as he stepped onto the porch. Company, I hollered. Well, yeah, I told Mildred that she was giving the hog as a gift. Gabe, I'm a nasty mess, I protested. I'm going to have to strip all the way down to my t-shirt just to keep the buzzers from gagging. I'm in no shape to meet company. Oh, he said. He waved my words away with his hand like he was shooting a fly from beside his ear. It's just an old Mississippi boy. I've known him for years. You'll be fine. With that, I stripped down to my drawers, shucked on a pair of Gabe's mud waders, and walked into the dining room. When I saw the company, I froze in my tracks. I was looking straight in the snickering face of Trent Lott, the most powerful senator Mississippi had produced since Reconstruction. Trent, this here's our preacher, a fine preacher. Pretty good hog hunter, too, Gabe laughed as he pointed in my direction. Preacher, I've known Trent since we were boys. He taught me to run trot lines. I'm the one who inducted him into the lodge, so I reckon I started him in politics, he said proudly. So sitting there in my drawers and borrowed hip waders, I had dinner with the former Senate Majority Leader with pig crap in my hair. Senator Lott treated me like the President of the United States, and I was reminded yet again that one should never be surprised at the way Southern folks can surprise you. It's a great story, right? So just a funny story. Here's Trent Lott, and you go out and you see the guy making fun of him. And the hero of the story, of course, is the old guy and making fun of the young minister. It's just a fantastic tale of the South, and you can just see it, right? You can imagine this actually happening, that somebody would play a trick on someone like this. So that agrarian life, though, that he's getting into there is old Southern. That's the old Southern tradition, and we've got a piece by Michael Martin on Tuesday, Rage Against the Industrial Food Machine, that gets into people that are trying to have family farms, and that's something that we're losing in America. And some people have made fun of this piece because Michael Martin said some things in it that people just don't understand, or maybe said some things about COVID and others that people bristle at nowadays. But I think that it's important to get the gist of this article. He said in here, when someone goes to buy a ground beef patty from Polyphus Farms, it comes from one cow. Joe Salatin has been labeled a madman because he wants to raise animals in a way that harmonizes with nature. As he pointed out in the documentary Food Inc., our society has perverted science by genetically modifying animals and using technology to figure out extensive ways to grow and use corn as animal feed, when the industry never really stopped to consider the long-term health effects of consuming animals raised this way. Looking at our food this way has unintended consequences that impact how we treat the earth and each other. Salatin put it perfectly when he stated, quote, a culture that just uses a pig as a pile of protoplasmic inanimate structure to be manipulated by whatever creative design the human can foist on that critter will probably view individuals within its community and other creatures in the community of nations with the same type of disdain and disrespect and controlling type mentalities. He said the South has always been the agricultural crater of the United States. Farmers like Joe Salatin are trying to bring food production and healthy living back to the community level. The true spirit of the South is based on a respect for and independence with Mother Nature. Salatin exemplifies this philosophy and represents the best that the South has to offer. During these troubled times, this kind of thinking just might save America. And this is important because we've talked about, several people in the Institute, what kind of message do we want to promote for the Institute moving forward? We do everything. We talk about the history, we talk about the tradition, but what is about the South that will survive? And it's this kind of stuff. It's the idea that we have sustainable agriculture, small farms, independent people that vote independently. That's an important thing. And I think that we miss that, right? And so that's where the Southern tradition can speak to people from moving forward in ways that would be applicable to modern society. Talking about the war is important. Don't get me wrong. Very important thing. But it can't be the only thing we do, and it's not. It never has been. People often label the Abbeville Institute as kind of like a neo-Confederate organization because we talk about political decentralization, and certainly we are very favorable to Confederate leaders, and we're very favorable to the ideas of secession and nullification, at least in theory, in talking about them and what they mean. So we like that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, those things only work if you have a tradition to preserve or conserve. They only work if you're holding on to something. If you don't have that, then there's nothing to conserve. I mean, Southerners went to war in 1861 because they were protecting their firesides, their homes. This is what Lee said in September of 1861. He said it. Our war is to protect our families and our land, right? That's what we're going to. We're protecting it from an invasion. That's why men went to fight in 1861. That's why they did it. And so, but they had something to defend. What is it we have to defend today? McDonald's? Some other type of plastic part of imported American culture in the South? What are we defending? Is it just some foodways? Is it music? Is Is it art? I mean, what is it? What are we defending in the South or in traditional America and in general? I mean, all across the United States. The Southern tradition applies to everywhere, right? It applies to people living in Northern California defending their traditions against the lunacy of Southern California. It applies to people in Montana and Colorado and Wyoming. It applies to people in Tennessee. It applies to people in the western part of Pennsylvania and New York. It applies to all those people, to Iowa. It applies to these people everywhere. The Southern tradition is timeless. It really is the Jeffersonian tradition, and I think that's something that we need to understand about this, which is why I'm glad that we had a piece on Jefferson from M. Andrew Holochak on Thursday. And I like this piece because it talks about American slavery in a realistic way. And what I mean by realistic, he takes out the moral side of it. So today in the 21st century, no one would question the position that slavery is immoral, right? I mean, no one would say it's not. No one would say it's a moral thing to do. But in the time period in the 19th century, when Jefferson was writing these things, he said it's not a moral question, it's a political question. This is being made into an issue because it's political, because the North wants to control the South. It was the heart of the issue. It was two clashing cultures, butting heads, and slavery became the way to do it. Now, there's Federalists openly said as much in letters that, hey, if we can't break this alliance between the West and the South, we're done. If we can't do that, we're done. If we can't decide to figure out how to get these two things broken apart, we're not going to make it. And so when you look at the false dichotomy of the pious anti-slavery North and the wicked pro-slavery South, Jefferson nailed it with what it was. And he gave a nice quote. And he said, Thomas Jefferson knew well the hypocrisy of Northern politicians when they made slavery the big issue behind the Missouri crisis. He writes in a letter to Albert Gallatin on December 26, 1820, quote, "Nothing is ever presented so threatening an aspect as what is called the Missouri question. The Federalists, completely put down and despairing of ever rising again under the old divisions of Whig and Tory, devised a new one, of slaveholding and non-slaveholding states, which, while it had a semblance of being moral, was at the same time geographical, and calculated to give them ascendancy by debauching their old opponents to a coalition with them. Moral the question certainly is not, because the removal of slaves from one state to another, no more than their removal from one country to another, would never make a slave of one human being who would not be so without it. Indeed, if there were any morality in the question, it is on the other side, because by spreading them over a larger surface, their happiness would be increased, and the burden of their future liberation lightened by bringing a greater number of shoulders under it. However, it served to throw dust into the eyes of the people and to fanaticize them, while to the knowing ones it gave a geographical and preponderant line of the Potomac and Ohio, throwing 14 states to the north and east and 10 to the south and west. So, Holochak says the issue Jefferson notes, and he is certainly correct, is one of political clout. As a result of Jefferson's, Madison's, and Monroe's presidencies, the Federalists had shrunk to virtual non-existence, and so they had rallied around a new issue, slavery, and they aimed to fatten their lean bodies by making themselves true champions of its eradication. Eradication of slavery would cripple the Southern economy and bring the North into political prominence. This is exactly right. I mean, look, the issue of slavery became a question of power. And Jefferson says that. Jefferson continues, "With these Federalists, therefore, it is merely a question of power. But with this geographical minority, it is a question of existence. For if Congress once goes out of the Constitution to arrogate a right of regulating the condition of the inhabitants of the states, its majority may, and probably will next declare, that the condition of all men within the U.S. shall be that of freedom, in which case all the whites south of Potomac and Ohio must evacuate their states, and most fortunate those who can do it first, and so far this crisis seems to be advancing." So here we have, Jefferson fearful of what's going to happen. We missed that Calhoun in the Positive Good speech said, look, I'm going to tell you right now that Congress can abolish slavery. I think Calhoun was open about it. He said they can do it. If they can pass a protective tariff, which is unconstitutional, they can pass a law abolishing slavery. If they can pass unconstitutional laws and no one's going to stop it, well, they can pass any unconstitutional law they want. It's why he had the concurrent majority. So he was always consistent about his position. If the Congress passes unconstitutional laws, they will keep passing unconstitutional laws. And that was his point in that speech. And he said, hey, If they can do it, they should do it now because of course they can. But they're going to come up with a constitution. Well, we can't do that because it's unconstitutional. Yet if they really wanted to, they would just do it. If the North really wanted to abolish slavery, they would do it right then. And there wouldn't be any objection to it because there was no objection to a protective tariff, which we said was unconstitutional. They did it anyways. So how would the Constitution stop them? That was a question that Calhoun was asking, and it's essentially the same thing that Jefferson's saying here. If they can prevent a state from doing things that are purely outside the realm of the Constitution for the federal government, then they can do anything they want. It's the same situation the colonies faced when even Tom Paine said that, of course, if the situation there was that the British could legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Same thing. It's the American crisis. That's what he said. So it's the same thing if the Congress can do this. There's no stopping their power. Well, Jefferson said it was a question of power. Now, he gets into a lot of other things here, of course, with race and what Jefferson thought of race. But I think the point here is that the most important point driving this is that Jefferson wasn't saying anything in 1820 that was radical. I mean, most Americans thought this. I mean, Jefferson's views on race may have been actually more agreeable than most Americans at the time. I think, Dr. Holochak is a little more in line with thinking that Jefferson was much more of egalitarian than he was. But I think that the point is Jefferson saw clearly what was happening. He saw clearly what was happening in the United States. This was a question of power. It wasn't a question of moral right and moral wrong, because Northerners didn't really care about that. What they cared about, though, was lining their pockets. What they cared about was ensuring they had political power. What they cared about was isolating the South and the West and breaking these farmers up so that there would be no way the Democrats would continue to win every election. And the best example of it was 5 years before this, the Hartford Convention, when they proposed a series of amendments which would have done exactly that. So the Federalists for years in New England were trying to figure out a way to break this burgeoning alliance between the West and the South. It's what they wanted. It's what they thought would save their party, and they were right. It's what did save their party. Using a rhetorical issue like slavery to damage the West and the South, the relationship there, which in many ways was more natural. A farmer from Illinois or Ohio or Iowa had more in common with a farmer from Tennessee or Mississippi or Alabama than a merchant from Boston. But yet, they had the same disdain for the expansion of slavery. And in the Midwest, it was because of race. In the New England area, it was because they had some type of predisposition for it. I mean, they thought that they were better because they had already abolished it. But the fact is, there was complex reasons why each state or people in each state wanted to see slavery eradicated. Regardless, that became a key issue because of politics, because of political power. And Reconstruction is the same way. The piece by Phil Lee on Wednesday, Reconstruction Era Chicanery, is the same thing. This is a short piece, and I think, it's so essential for understanding what happened in Reconstruction. It was all about power, too. He said, I think this piece does it very concisely. If you haven't read Phil Lee's Southern Reconstruction, you need to read it. Go out to Amazon, Leigh, Phil Lee, Leigh, Southern Reconstruction. Pick up his book. It's the best short volume on Reconstruction that's been produced in a long time. If you want something a little shorter than, say, E. Merton Coulter's the South during Reconstruction, this is good. You've got Robert Self Henry's The Story of Reconstruction, which is more of a narrative. It's fun. It's a good read. Very nice to read, I should say. It's good, solid history. But, of course, you have Phil Lee's, which is good as well. It's not Eric Foner, I'll say that. So Phil Lee says, post-war Southern Reconstruction became corrupted when congressional Republicans took charge of it with the March 1867 Reconstruction Acts, almost 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Prior to that, the process began in December 1863, while the war was still in progress. After Lincoln died and Andrew Johnson advanced to the presidency, Johnson tried to continue with a presidential Reconstruction plan. Johnson granted amnesty to ordinary Confederates who would take a new Union loyalty oath, which would immunize them to charges of treason and enable them to own property. Wealthy Southerners and Confederate leaders, however, were required to petition directly the President for amnesty on a case-by-case basis. To be readmitted to the Union, the former Confederate states were required to outlaw slavery, repudiate their Civil War debts, and rescind their secession ordinances. All complied, but Congress would not seat their elected representatives. That's the important part. So this was essentially Lincoln's Reconstruction plan. This is where I say that had Lincoln survived 1865, there's no guarantee that Lincoln's Reconstruction plan is any better than Johnson's, or that he would be able to get it done any more effectively than Andrew Johnson. That's something people don't realize. And when Congress said you can't sit in this Congress, then they proceeded to pass all kinds of legislation because they had no objection to it. Radical congressional Republicans began the takeover process early in 1866 when they gained a veto-proof majority early that year. During the ensuing year, they wrote the 14th Amendment and prepared the Reconstruction Acts. The acts required martial law in the South until they were readmitted to the Union under terms satisfactory to Congress. Those terms require universal black male suffrage in all former Confederate but not Northern states, and the disfranchisement of selected Confederate leaders. The Radicals intended to use the black vote to create puppet regimes in the South to ensure that the infant GOP retained control of the federal government after the Southern states were readmitted. See, the fear was something people don't talk about very much. But the fear was that now that former slaves were counted as one whole person towards representation, the South would have a supermajority in the Congress, right? They would have much more power because when it was 3/5, they had tremendous power. Now they'd have a lot more power, and the Republicans would be subjected to constant Democrat rule, which eventually they would get, right? So that was the fear, and that's why they wanted to disfranchise white voters and enfranchise black voters, because that would ensure that the Republicans would win. And this is what Lincoln's whole goal in 1860 was to ensure Republican ascendancy. Is why he wouldn't support any compromise measures. Once the federal process was completed, blacks composed most of the voters in 5 of the 11 former Confederate states: Mississippi, South Carolina, Louisiana, Florida, and Alabama. They comprised half of Georgia voters, which would enable a small number of white carpetbaggers to control the state by unifying with blacks. The problem for Republicans was that whites still had majorities in the remaining former Confederate states, mostly in the Upper South. And that's where the chicanery gets convoluted. Republicans gained control of the remaining southern states differently, but here's how they did it in Arkansas. First, when the state's 1868 carpetbag constitution was put to a vote for ratification, the vote outcome was arbitrarily decided by General G.H. Smith. He was the sub-district commander and basically a dictator under martial law. Although the tallies favoring the Constitution were clearly fraudulent, Smith ruled they were valid. When the opposition showed that the number of votes in the most populous county exceeded the number of voters by 20%, Smith ignored the complaint. That county voted 5-1 in favor of the vassal Constitution. Second, after Carpetbag Powell Clayton was inaugurated governor in July of 1868, his legislation passed a sneaky provision requiring that all Confederates who took Johnson's postbellum allegiance oath to the Union prove that they did not break the oath after the war had ended. The act stipulated only 2 practical ways an oath taker could show that he complied with the oath. One was to show that he had openly advocated for congressional, not Johnson's or Lincoln's, Reconstruction. The other was to provide compelling evidence that he had voted for Arkansas's 1868 Carpetbag Constitution. So in order to say that, to get the pardon, you had to show that you were a radical Republican, which of course these people weren't going to do. Since Arkansas's radical Reconstruction ended by 1876, the number of ex-Confederates disfranchised by Clayton and the 1868 Republican Congress can be estimated by comparing the number of votes in 1868, when only carpetbaggers, scalawags, and blacks could vote, to the number in 1876, when all adult males could vote. 41,000 Arkansans voted in 1868 as compared to 95,000 in 1876. The number of 54,000 suggests that about 57% of former Confederate Arkansans were disfranchised. A similar calculation shows that the abuse in Tennessee was even worse. So, if you look at the chart he has on this page, I mean, it's quite interesting because it shows you that in Alabama, for example, in 1860, the total population was 55% white, 45% black. But in 1868, the voting percentage was 37% white, 63% black. You take Florida, 58-42 white to black population, 43-57 voting population. Georgia, 58-42, 50-50. Louisiana, 51-49, 35-65. South Carolina, 44-56. So South Carolina always had a black majority, but in the voting election, it was 37-63. So, I mean, here you have these states, as he mentioned, and then you have several others, but even those states went down. You have Texas is 74-26, white to black. Voting in 1868 was 55-45, so substantially different from the population of those states. So that's what you're looking at here with the Republican Party and how their chicanery, as he points out, is a major problem for understanding what's going on in American society. So anyways, I really like that piece, and we had a really good piece on Stonewall Jackson too on Friday. It's a reprint of an old article, and so you should get out there and read that. But because we're up against time, I'm going to stop here, and we got some great stuff coming next week. I'm really excited about it. Make sure you're looking for that conference. Get on that Zoom. We can have 500 tickets now, so if you want to get on, you can certainly get on. But look for the email to go out this week because we got the thing next week, next Tuesday, 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern Time. So hopefully you can make that. Until next time, good day.